All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much again for being here. Thank you to those of you who were not able to join us last time, who are joining us today. And thank you to those of you who are signing in online and watching the recorded version of that. So welcome to our Program Assessment Plan Developer Training number 2. So the goal of this training is to really tie up some loose ends, some questions that we had from our previous training, provide you with a little bit more additional knowledge and support around the work that we're doing, and then to also really prepare us for the workshop that's coming up on October 19th. That's going to be that hands-on workshop. I spoke with our external consultant who's coming in on the 19th, and then on November 2nd this morning, we were able to discuss, what we're going to be accomplishing in that workshop, as well as the training that I'm doing here today. So it's really going to prepare us and lead us right into the work that's going to be accomplished on the 19th. So that's kind of the goals for today, and so that's the content that we're going to be diving into. I did read all the note cards that were turned in from our last training, and I tried to reflect answers to all of those questions in my presentation in the training today. But if I don't explicitly answer one of your questions, please feel free, jump in, raise hands, right? We want to make sure that we're approaching the 19th in this work with the most clarity possible, okay? So I want to kick off with an update of where we've been and where we are presently. So again, we held our first training on September 24th, for those of you who were able to join us here in person, and then majority of us did watch that recording online. And so the attendance was in person through Blackboard, and our homework was to identify if your programs, the programs that you've been assigned or are responsible for this position, have existing program level outcomes. So I received a lot of those program outcomes through email, so thank you for sending those, and those are really helping us evaluate the work around who's going to be revising some outcomes, and also who is going to be really creating new outcomes. So that was really helpful to see, and that's also going to really help us prep, again, for the workshop on the 19th. It's going to help us provide you with materials and packets, and I'm explaining that a little bit more towards the end of the training today, but it's really helping us prep for the bulk of material that's happening on the 19th, and I hope it was helpful for you as well, right, to even get an idea, get a grasp of, do we have these existing, might be revising, might be creating, so I hope that was helpful for you to kind of go through that discovery process. The other thing I wanted to really emphasize is that we currently have 100% program participation across campus. So that is, yes, thank you. That is huge. That is really exciting. So again, just a huge thank you to all of you for being willing to dive in, engage in this work. All of our programs across campus are covered by a program assessment plan developer. And so as we are moving forward in this work, again, that idea that we are creating a systematic, sustainable assessment culture and structure here on campus is happening, right? It's 100% of programs, and that is currently happening. So that's a huge win, and I wanted to share that and celebrate that. And then you have a lot of coworkers, colleagues across campus who are engaging in this work as well. So the second training today, again, just wanted to reemphasize that this is a required training, either obviously if you're here in person, and then also to watch that recording before the recording of this session before the 19th. And then the workshop on the 19th and the 2nd, both of those are mandatory for the stipend position unless you make other arrangements with me. So I've already received some emails of some accommodations, and I will be in contact with those individuals moving forward for how to make sure that you're best supported through this process and that everyone feels like they're equally supported across this process. So another question that came up from our last training was just a really explicit timeline, right? I know we are moving quickly on this, we are moving forward, but I wanted to make sure that expectations and timelines are very clear for when this work needs to be accomplished. So I want to make sure that I spent some time sharing that with you today. So our explicit timeline for this semester, we're really kicking that off with the workshop that is happening on 10/19, right? So that Friday workshop, that hands-on workshop where we do anticipate a lot of this work being done. So I ended our last session with, hold up, go find out if you have program outcomes, but you don't have to run back and start creating or revising them yet. I know some areas have started engaging in a dialogue, right, talking about those, and that's great. I hope as we look forward to the 10/19 date that these trainings are really informing how you're looking and maybe examining those program outcomes or thinking about your program outcomes. But we do really anticipate that workshop being where a lot of this work happens. So that's the Friday 10/19. And the assessment committee is then, as a result of what we learn in that workshop, going to be reviewing your program level outcomes. Okay, so the assessment committee is going to review them and provide some feedback. And so that is going to happen between that 10/19 date and the next week, the next Friday, 10/26. So if you have your program outcomes done before then, I would encourage you to maybe kind of hold off, make sure you are really looking at that with the knowledge that you're acquiring in that workshop, right? We're scaffolding this process, and so we really see that most of these program outcomes will be turned in that time frame. Now, I do wanted to comment that if you have curriculum going before the curriculum committee for other reasons and you want to incorporate the program outcomes as a result in that same documentation so you don't have to do that twice, please speak with me, okay? But really, this is the next deadline that's going to be going forward to curriculum, so that shouldn't be an issue, right? So we should all be turning in our revisions to curriculum at the same time. So that's the feedback window. Then the assessment committee is going to be able to provide comments on your outcomes, and then any revisions should be due by that second workshop. So the second workshop is going to be held on 11/2, and so if you are still working on those outcomes or you're revising those outcomes, that's going to be a supported environment in which you are going to be able to do that. So we'll have that hands-on, right, workshop on 11/2 where you're going to have support. So if you're still working or still revising some of the feedback, that will occur by that 11/2 date. Now, the deadline to submit to your deans is going to be 11/3. That is a Saturday, but that's just to give you a little bit of a window, because then the deans have to submit to curriculum by that Monday 11/5. So that is the curriculum deadline, where all of these curriculum proposal forms will be turned into curriculum committee. So that will start the process of curriculum, but for the assessment committee, we are really concerned about the work that's happening before that deadline. So by the time it's turned into curriculum, the assessment committee will have evaluated, offered revisions, and your outcomes should be, good to go by the time it even starts the curriculum process. So when it goes through the curriculum process, that will be a blanket vote at curriculum to approve all of those outcomes. Okay? Do you have any questions on this timeline?
Is that this year?
Yeah.
It says 10/19, I'm just thinking.
Oh, I have the 2018 up at the top. Thanks, Dennis. Yes, this semester. Okay. So we really built it with this deadline in mind, the curriculum committee deadline. That's the deadline that we want to make sure we hit. So all of these outcomes will be approved through the curriculum process as of this semester. So that's that last deadline. It will be approved through the board, and then that will be kind of that key deliverable for the semester that all programs across campus will have program outcomes approved through curriculum by the end of this semester. And then you have all of these scaffolded opportunities to get that work done before that deadline. Okay. So if you have any questions about the dates, about the work that's going to be done, I'm going to get a little bit more explicit on those deliverables towards the end of our training today, but I did want to make sure I had specific dates for you to make sure that was clearly communicated when all of this work is going to be done, and what the stipulations are, again, for that stipend for this semester. Okay? All right. So let's dive into a little bit more of the content that we have around our program level learning outcomes. We're just going to build on top of some of the conversation that we started our last training and really clarify and help answer any questions that may still be lingering about the creation of these program level outcomes. So these were the framing questions that we kicked off at our last workshop, so hopefully this is familiar. But really what we're asking when we're talking about our program level outcomes are, by the end of a program of study, what do you want your students to be able to do? right? Reflecting on that question, by the end of a program of study, what do you want your students to be able to do? And then the second question, how can your students demonstrate the knowledge the program intended them to learn, right? So really that relationship between outcomes and assessment, right? What do we want your students to be able to do? And then how are they going to be able to show that they learned? So let's dive into a few of the characteristics of good learning outcomes, because that was some of the questions that I received. Like, how do we know that my learning outcomes are good, right? If you're revising or if you're creating, what are some of these characteristics of a good learning outcome? Now, these I've tweaked to be specific to program level outcomes. So when it is directly related to that program level, it'll say that. But also some of these are a little bit more general to just characteristics of good learning outcomes despite the level. So learning outcomes, right, as a whole, are student-centered, and they should be focused on the knowledge and skills that students can demonstrate, right? And that's where we talked last training about that formula. Students will be able to action verb, right? So they're student-centered. Second, the learning that's described specifically in program-level outcomes should encompass the essential and significant knowledge and skills expected from students. And these are generally near the completion of their course of study. So this kind of brought up two questions that we had from our last training. The first one is how many learning outcomes, right? And so yes, feasibly you could write 20 program level outcomes, right? But really what we want is to focus on the essential and significant knowledge and skills. So when you're crafting those, the guideline I'm going to share with you in just a little bit is around 5 to 7, right, learning outcomes. And we really want to make sure that we're focusing on these essential and significant knowledge and skills expected from students. And when we think about it as a program, right, we think about it as reaching towards the end of that program of study. The question came up is, what happens if my program, right, doesn't have a capstone class, right? What we're really looking for is then what is a course that students typically take in their 3rd or 4th semester, right? And not all of this is going to be necessarily perfect, right? You're not always going to capture every student in the 4th semester if you don't have that capstone class built in. But this is, again, thinking about generally when do students take these of their course of study. You have a capstone class in your program, right? That's excellent. That's built in, and you know when students are taking those capstone courses. Also, learning outcomes, kind of as a whole, are generally short, right? This is characteristic of all, not just program level. Generally short, they're typically one clear sentence or one sentence that clearly states the behaviors that students should be able to demonstrate. So continuing on, good student learning outcomes focus on the action that signifies student learning by using concrete, measurable verbs, right? We shared those verbs last time. We looked at some collections of verbs. That's absolutely resources. I will be sharing out resources that will include lists of verbs, but we want to make sure that we are using concrete, measurable verbs. So first drafts of student learning outcomes often include verbs like understand, be aware of, appreciate, and these are difficult to observe and measure. Some of you may have seen some of these as you were pulling existing program learning outcomes. You may have seen some culprits of understand, be aware of, appreciate, right? And what we really want to look at when we are revising is looking at actionable verbs, such as interpret, compare, design, evaluate. These are more concrete and able to be measured. So the number of outcomes will vary by department. This will also vary depending on if you're working on a certificate program versus a degree program. But we're going to say generally 5 to 7, right? So usually 5 to 7, and then generally no more than 10, right? Some of the exceptions is when some of these outcomes are really enforced or given to by outside accreditations, right? But we really want to talk about your program learning outcomes as with specialized accreditation. You really want to talk about it as what are these outcomes that are all schools or all colleges would incorporate, but then also looking at what makes maybe your program unique here at Triton. Are there learning outcomes that you are adding additionally to those accrediting outcomes? outcomes. Okay, so we want to think about those variations as well. But really the point of that is to say we want to focus on a manageable number, and then that again reflects significant learning, right? We don't need to list out everything in the program. We want to focus on the significant knowledge that students will be able to have as a result of that program. Okay. Are there any questions on some of these characteristics? Okay. Great. Then I'm going to go on to talk about writing our program level learning outcomes. So some of these things to keep in mind. Program outcomes should be directly related to the academic discipline of the program and not the general education components of a curriculum. This is another question that came up, is the idea that you have this course of curriculum, right? You have your general education core, and then you have the courses that are specific to your program. That is what we want to focus on, the courses that are specific to your program. So something general would say, Greg, I was thinking about you, criminal justice students, right, will be able to think critically. That idea of thinking critically is more of a general education outcome, right? You want to take some of those outcomes and make sure that they are program specific. So a program specific outcome would be criminal justice students or students who complete this criminal justice program will be able to analyze a current issue in criminal justice, right? So you want to contextualize that within your specific program. Again, program outcomes must be observable and measurable. So same example, criminal justice students will think critically, right? That's not as observable and measurable as students will be able to analyze a current issue in criminal justice, right? We can start to think about what would an assignment look like, or what would a opportunity to demonstrate that learning look like if you're asking students to analyze a current issue in criminal justice. We can start to think about that assessment method. Third, program outcomes must be focused on learning outcomes rather than curricular inputs. And you may have seen this reflected in some of the outcomes that are existing as well. Something that is input focused, right? All department labs will be equipped with state-of-the-art instrumentation, right? That's great, but that's not focused on what students will learn, right? When something that is outcome focused is that students will be able to demonstrate safe laboratory practice. That includes adherence to all safety regulations and appropriate test sample handling, right? So the focus from inputs, what we as a college will do or what we as faculty will do, and make sure that we're switching towards an outcome focus of what students will be able to do. Okay. Any questions here? Last, program outcomes must communicate a single outcome rather than combined multiple outcomes in a single statement, right? So when you have a program level outcome that states students who complete the psychology program will be able to understand the concepts of psychology and apply those concepts to the design and application of research problems, then you are creating an assessment that needs to point out whether or not students understand the concepts of psychology or apply. So if you are saying that students are not meeting this outcome, which part, right? Where is student learning lacking? Are they not able to understand the concepts of psychology, or are they not able to apply them, right? And so we want to make sure that we use a single outcome, and that's where the question, do I do one verb, two verbs, right? How many? When you're looking at those outcomes, you want to make sure you have one actionable verb that you're asking students to demonstrate learning. So, single outcome, students who complete the psychology program will be able to design a research study, right? So when we hear design a research study, again, we can think of that assessment or that opportunity to demonstrate a learning, and you are measuring one learning opportunity, designing a research study. Okay, any questions on that piece? So hopefully that will clear up some of the how many verbs, right? How much can I try to cram into one of these student learning outcomes? That's why we're focusing on one verb. We're understanding one outcome, and that's why when we're talking about generally between 5 to 7, we're talking about the most significant knowledge that students should be able to have as a result of the program, right? So we're really paring that down to the essentials, okay? So this process, I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of kind of a map of thinking, right, of actions, how to go about this process. If you're tracking with me, or you understand where we're going, well, what could that look like, right? And so the first question, right, this is our framing question. What is it that students should know or be able to do as a result of your program, right? That is the framing question for all of this work. So you can refer as a second step to resources from your discipline, from your department, and the college, right? Reflecting the general education outcomes, the mission vision of the college, but also referring to resources from your discipline, right, in your department. So pulling existing program learning outcomes was that first step, right? Seeing what's already existing here at the college. You can absolutely, the work is going to be revising some of those potentially, but if you have them in place, we want you to start from that as a foundation. Look at other disciplines, right? So if you don't have existing program learning outcomes and you're starting to think about what it might look like to create some, look at other faculty across the country who are doing this work, right? Look to your disciplines and look to see what other faculty are doing. We are not the only institution who is engaging in this work, right? So looking to our peers and seeing what other faculty are doing in your discipline. And then taking a look at, again, resources from your department, work that's been done in this area. The third step, again, is to really keep those outcomes student-centered, right? So we're constantly reflecting on what do we want students to be able to know or be able to do. The next one I would say is as you're looking at your curriculum, so as you're looking at your courses, these program level outcomes should absolutely be kind of bubbling up and generated from the courses that make up that program, right? So as we're looking at the course outcomes, you should start to be able to kind of group outcomes in broad categories based on similarity, and then taking a look at what a program outcome might look like. In just a few minutes, we're going to look at an example of this, but they should absolutely, it shouldn't be coming out of thin air, right? It should absolutely be rooted in the curriculum and the courses that are making up that program. And then I would encourage you to share draft outcomes with others, right? So whether that might be people within your department or area, we have a whole cohort of colleagues, right, who are currently doing this work. So using that as an advantage, talking to maybe your office mate, someone in your area, or engaging with people that you meet or see here, sharing those outcomes and getting feedback. Really starting a dialogue about some of these outcomes. And of course, the workshops are going to be very easy places to do that, right? So on the 19th and then on the 2nd, we've created space for you to get feedback, to have conversations with each other, with the assessment committee, and then with myself, with Christopher, and with Joe, right? So these are going to be natural places for those conversations to take place. So now I'm going to turn, I'm actually going to invite Christopher Clem, who's serving as our faculty assessment specialist this year, to talk a little bit about an ingenious example that Christopher created, which is our hypothetical program of basket weaving here at Triton College. So, thank you, that was my example, or my reaction as well. So this is going to be an example that's going to take us through that entire process, right? From our course outcomes to our program level outcomes. It's also, if you have questions around how do my certificate programs link up to maybe degree programs, we're going to talk through all of those together.
Man the machine.
Sure.
So when Laura and I were having a conversation about how do we sort of distill this down into a very clear example of how the process works, we batted around maybe working off of an existing program, right, and using that as an example, but then we worried that maybe it would be too focused in one area of the college. And so I floated out the idea, and she thought it was decent enough. I said, why don't we just create a fictional program? And so I figured I've always wanted to write a basket weaving course, right? So let's do it. So this basket weaving program here at Triton College, you can either obtain a certificate in basket weaving, or you can go ahead and get an Associate of Arts in Science in basket weaving, right? So this would provide an example of, a lot of us have stackable certificates, right? build a degree off of a basic core set of courses that provide a certificate. And so core courses in basket weaving obviously are basket weaving 1 and basket weaving 2. Okay, should you choose to go on and get a transferable degree, you would need some general education requirements, right? So we decided that you probably needed a humanities. So the basket, a cultural anthropology, gives you that humanities requirement, and fiber science takes care of your science. So I decided to sort of model how this process works. We have 4 basic courses. Each of those courses has outcomes. So we're going to go through and sort of model how each course has outcomes. And so in basket weaving 1, I would hope that students would know by the end of basket weaving 1 how to analyze weaving techniques, produce a basket. You can't do that. I mean, what's the point of taking basket weaving 1, right? Describe classic basket forms and differentiate between a functional piece and an art piece. And for every one of my outcomes, right, I've identified how I'm going to assess that learning has occurred with either a critique, a project, a paper, or an in-class role presentation. So everyone I think, has a course where they have this sort of format already built out. In basket weaving 2, it gets a little more complicated. We bump it up a level, and you're going to create a mixed media basket. None of this like one fiber stuff. You're going to design a functional art piece. So it's not just pretty, it's not just functional, it's pretty and functional. It's pretty functional. Evaluate the engineering of various baskets, right? If it's designed to hold something and it doesn't, it's probably not equipped for the purpose. And, you know, every once in a while your basket breaks. And we all want to be sustainable and encounter a sustainable practice, so rather than throw it out, we will fix it. And again, you have some assessment tools. Ooh, you have to break a lot of baskets for you to pass that course. All right. So once I've completed those 2 courses in the certificate, by the end of that certificate, I would expect students to not necessarily, as my program level outcomes, just roll up every single one of those discrete course level outcomes, but find the overarching theme. By having taken both courses, what's the bigger, more general knowledge that I learned, right? And I would also hope that the demonstrated learning would be at a higher level, not sort of the lower order taxonomy, but higher level. So create, design, develop, and critique. Right? Now, for those students interested in going on to a 4-year institution, taking their general education and taking the anthropology course, I had a lot of fun writing this course because I could imagine like developing a lesson plan and like some lectures and like breaking out in groups and having a really good story and conversation about how gender perspectives influence the cultural value of baskets.
I want to take this course.
I mean, seriously, right? You know, and you know, so students would be expected to illustrate the importance of baskets through his or her story, explain gender, right? Everything has a gender perspective, even the baskets. Mm-hmm. Describe how baskets were central to the birth of human civ. I mean, without the basket, we'd still be carrying things in our hands, right? Then there'd be no room for the cell phone. Discuss the significance of baskets in various cultures. And so because it's kind of a humanities class, you write a lot of papers, essay. Okay? And then, so you can see then here in this slide how we go, like I had mentioned before, rather than having the course outcomes become the general education program level outcome, we see how all of those things distill down into something a little more general, discuss the role of baskets in society. So all of those things, gender, history, all those things sort of roll up into the role of the basket in society on a more higher order, broad perspective. A little easier to assess than all those individual specific things.
Right. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that those were some of the questions that came out of our last training. The idea of the level of program outcomes, right? It's not just copying and pasting the course, because the course may be at a lower level in terms of the action verb on Bloom's taxonomy, where the program level is really bumping that up, and then also it is encompassing kind of that essential knowledge. That's how we're going to get to that guideline of 5 to 7, is we're not just incorporating all the course level outcomes, but we're really synthesizing those into the 5 to 7 most important, most significant knowledge of the program. Okay, are there any questions on that piece? Yeah?
It just seems like discuss is hard to assess, and I don't know, I'm asking about the verb discuss. Like, the others are so specific, and yeah, you can tell exactly, but discuss is so general, and so they can discuss it but not really fully understand. I don't know, I'm just struggling with some of the verbs.
So, but that's, I think, the nice thing, right? So in a lot of our programs, you're not the only person teaching a course, right? And we all have a degree of academic freedom. And so maybe in your course, the way you teach a discussion is actually through an essay, right? And so discuss your understanding of the topic through an essay. Maybe it is in an actual classroom discussion. Maybe it is a persuasive speech if I'm teaching speech class. Or I think discuss has some nuance to it, but it can, I think, as just a discussion face to face is hard to assess. But I think you can construe it a little more broadly as something that can be measured if you take it a little.
I don't think we're supposed to use the verb know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and this is how I struggle, is I feel like you can assess whether a student knows something. I feel like we all do that every day. So know seems stronger to me than discuss, but you don't want us to use know.
You teach facts. In this course,
yeah.
right, we're talking about gender perspectives.
Yeah, okay.
So sometimes I think I think that's why we kind of wrote this, right? I have a science class coming up next, where maybe a little more concrete, identify,
Okay.
Those types of things. So it can be
That
a little
helps,
more round, I guess.
With the word describe,
Oh,
change that.
so Francis, where were you on Sunday when I was writing this program? No, absolutely. So, I'm not recommending certain verbs over others, right? It's just we're trying to illustrate an example. But you're right. I mean, discuss might not be the strongest choice. Describe might be better. That's a good thing. We are involved in curriculum in this process. That's not acceptable.
And I would also emphasize how we ended our last training, is that assessment is a cycle of continuous improvement. So I do anticipate, for some of you who may be writing these outcomes for the first time, when we go to start assessing these program outcomes, and that's why I wanted to tie the idea of how are you going to assess it, how are students going to show it at the beginning, but I do anticipate that you're going to write some program outcomes when it comes time to actually have students demonstrate that learning. You're going to go, oh, I actually don't like that verb, I actually like this one better, right? And it's going to be an iterative process of continuous improvement. So I think that was a great example of that, right? And the value of discussing, having conversations, right, engaging in this, I think, at a level outside of just us in our classrooms. Absolutely.
And I'm going to go back and rewrite that one. Just
before you submit the curriculum?
The feedback that I've received, maybe rethink.
Before you put on the curriculum proposal form?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then we have a science course, of course. Of course, a horse is horse. So we're in baskets, right, mainly focused on material science, right? So differentiate the characteristics between various materials might be employed to make baskets. Evaluate those fibers for their utility, right? Be able to, through a laboratory exercise, evaluate the tensile strength of a fiber, right? If it has to hold a certain amount of weight, it should be strong enough to do so. Classify fibers based upon their characteristics, right? How flexible are they, et cetera, and then demonstrate the fabrication of such fibers, because I don't think there's like a local fiber basket weaving store where you can just go buy them. I think you might have to make your own. So you can see in a science class, obviously, quizzes and exams, laboratory exercises, and then practical examinations for the one that's actual applied science. And then next, right? So we can see then that these course outcomes roll up into additional program level outcomes. And so again, sort of distilling many discrete specific outcomes into more general ones that basically by the time not only have you taken this course, but all the other courses, you see how this course integrates with the others. And now you're able to, when you're designing your functional art piece, able to select an appropriate fiber based upon the learning you've done in this class, and then fabricate the appropriate fiber as well to fit the purpose that you have designed based upon the learning you've done in other courses. Does that sort of kind of make sense, how it's not just, we're not just evaluating outcomes in this course, but how the marriage of this course with all the other coursework I've done in my learning, how it creates a bigger program outcome.
Do you have any questions about this piece?
How many people wish that their program only had 4 courses in it?
Yes, I have one, please.
Yeah.
And if I'm just jumping the gun, you can let me know. How do we measure those? I mean, what's the tool?
It's a great question.
So, yeah. Could you go back? So, right, any one of these assessment tools, we talked in the last training that assessment is not grading. And while yes, your quiz will get a grade, right, assuming that your policy on that quiz is not like, oh, he wasn't here that day, so he's taking it late, I'm going to mark him down for his bad behavior, but actually just assessing it based upon the actual demonstration of the learning, that then could be, right, the assessment. If you feel that that is validly identifying, right, that that learning has been done, right? That learning could also happen in the assessment of your final project in basket weaving too, right? I asked you to design a functional art piece and it collapses before my eyes as I'm evaluating it. Well, you didn't select the correct fiber, or you did not fabricate it appropriately, right? So there's ways in which you can assess on different levels in different areas.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but my confusion here is that I hear a lot of talk about having program assessments that are measured rather than just rolling up the measurements from individual courses. So what I'm hearing here is that you're describing how people will show a level of significant accomplishment at a course level, but I'm still fuzzy on if I was doing this, what would I use as a tool to do the program outcome? I mean, do I have them do something external from all of their courses that shows me that they can select appropriate materials? I mean, it's if what we're going to do is take a sort of summative approach to how people have done in their different courses, then fine. So I'm measuring a lot of that. If I have to use a distinct tool to measure the program level outcome, then I need to figure out what that tool is going to be and how I can conveniently use that tool to measure student program level outcomes without overburdening the student.
Yes. So I have a short answer and then I won't get into the long answer.
Okay.
The longer side of it is that this is the next step in professional development, right? So as we are looking towards, we're building the structures. As we're building the structures, I want us to have assessment in mind, right? Like what kind of tool could show that students have learned this and to make sure that they are measurable. But the longer term professional development is TBD, right? So we are going to have professional development around what does it look like to assess these outcomes at the course, at the program, and at the general education outcomes level. So that is going to be part of all of this structure of professional development. So longer term, as we will get to it, right? This is like the beginning of a class, right? With the student asking, we're going to get there. The short answer is that that's the idea where you're looking towards a class in that program where students are typically taking it in the 3rd or 4th semester. Programs that have a capstone class, that's where the level of assessment is taking place. So if you have a capstone class, that's where students should be able to show the summative value of this assessment. where if you do not have a capstone class, it's really going to be looking at maybe trends in enrollment, right? Like where are students typically taking their third or fourth semester, which courses are they typically taking, and then what are the either assignments that are happening in that class that could provide an opportunity for them to demonstrate this level of learning. I would encourage, right, as we're thinking about the assessment, that this should be embedded into the course as much as possible. Because when faculty see this as an add-on, right, this is an extra, this is not part of my course, it becomes not meaningful, right? It should be meaningful and it should be directly related to the teaching and learning that's coming out of your course. So as we're thinking about these assessments, it should be embedded in the courses that are already teaching, should as much as possible, avoid an add-on assignment, because that's not necessarily going to be meaningful to you as an assessment, and it's not necessarily going to be meaningful to the students, right?
Lauren just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say embedded and not layered on top. So whether that means long-term, does it mean I tweak my assignment so that it does capture this data, but it's not creating a new additional assignment?
Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks for your question.
That's an excellent question. I think that helped everyone in the room.
The other point on this slide that I wanted to point out is that, again, that relationship between certificate programs and degree programs. If you have an area that has certificate programs that lead to, right, like Christopher was describing, a degree program, these outcomes should be stackable, right? But you should also be looking at them holistically in the sense that the certificate program, right, if these are our outcomes, we may be looking at somewhere between 3 to 5 outcomes for our certificate program, and then the additional outcomes should be in the courses, reflected in the courses that students have to take as to get a degree, right? The certificate generally would have fewer, and then the degree program would add on learning outcomes that are reflected of the additional knowledge that students who complete those extra courses would gain in the additional courses in the degree program, okay? So they should not be two completely separate sets of outcomes. They should be integrated and they should build on each other, where the degree program is reflecting the additional knowledge that students who complete the degree would have, okay? Are there any questions around that? Because I know that has been a concern when we're looking at the number of programs, of academic programs individuals have in their areas. Yes, Scott?
Okay, so for example, I have a law enforcement certificate, which is 27 hours, and the entire certificate relays the AAS degree. So if I'm going to be writing separate program level outcomes, the law enforcement certificate is career specific. The AAS degree is going to incorporate the general education classes that go along with it. So for my last several program level outcomes, should I figure out a way to incorporate the knowledge that a student will be gaining from the general education classes and how it will enhance their knowledge or critical thinking skills that go along with the career specific? Follow me, or am I?
Yeah, so let me answer and let me make sure I'm answering directly to your question. So the question was around program level outcomes reflecting the general education outcomes core. And the program level outcomes should reflect the learning that is happening as a result of your program. So the general education core is the same for most degree programs across, right, the institution. The general education core, right, is going to be the same. Those are represented by the general education requirements. The program level is what's making criminal programs, right? And then within criminal justice, right, your different degrees and certificates, you should be reflecting the different knowledge that students will get between taking this degree, between this certificate, and this degree. Okay, so it should always be rooted and contextual to your program. Mm-hmm. Did that directly answer? Okay. Are there any questions on that? Because that one's popped up a few times.
I guess
Yeah.
we talked about this a little bit. I guess I'm still struggling with classes that aren't within, like, so geology within that degree, there's only really 2 classes that take. We have 3 geology classes total,
Yeah.
but they have to take physics and biology and calculus and all these other things. Like, how do there's not like physics for geology or calculus for geology, like in this example where there's a specific class. So which of those do we and those are also counting as their gen ed. Some of them are, I guess that gen ed versus program level class, when it's outside your department, is hard to see that line, like what gets
Would you
formed
like
by
to answer,
program.
Christopher?
Well, so, but this goes back to even before training, number one, like the whole discussion of no other college does what we do here at Triton. No other college goes to the trouble of creating areas of concentration.
Right.
So we've almost created our own entity. So, right, I mean, right, it really, as Gabe mentioned in the last training, right, it's it's a science degree, right? It just so happens that their electives are in geology, right? So I think really, if you're going to call yourself a program and be your own unique thing, then those need to be geology focused, right? Understanding the learning that people will have gained towards geology that makes it different than Susan's program.
And really a lot of it's 2-3 classes, I think,
That's why no other
different
college
from
does
each other.
this.
So should we just focus on those?
Yeah, so
One
the
gen ed.
idea being, right, so then if we are going to call this a program, right, and we're going to say that this is distinct from other programs, what HLC is saying is if you're calling it a program, it needs to be assessed like a program in the sense that we need to show that there's unique knowledge, right, that students are having as a result of going through this one versus another AS degree. AS
Yeah,
degree?
AS.
So another AS degree. So yes, right, so you're focusing on those classes that make it distinct from another AS degree. Now, I'll also comment, if you were in the same boat as this, right, we are creating the structure for assessment, right? We are, as the assessment committee and as we're engaging in assessment work, what this is doing is creating the structure to have these conversations, right, and to engage in this work. The role or the where the discussions around decision making is happening is within your departments and areas, right? This is a faculty-led initiative, not faculty by the sense that like Christopher and I are faculty and we're up here, right? But faculty-led in the sense that decisions that are made, what this means for different programs and areas, how we take a look at our curriculum, right? This is all the work of faculty in teaching and learning. So we are creating the structure that is expected, but these conversations are all, we aren't driving any of these conversations. These conversations are deeply rooted in the faculty who are teaching and students are learning in their classrooms, right? So that is where you are empowered then to take maybe some of these, if there are areas of concern or some of these conversations that bubble up as a result of this work, to really, right, that's the work of assessment, right, continuously improve. So if as we are creating these assessment structures, if there are things that need to be improved or conversations to be had or things that need to be clarified, right, that is where this is deeply rooted in the faculty body to address those and have those conversations. Okay.
And not to be really repetitive, but I will, right? Back to basics, we're talking about 5 to 7 sentences. And I am 100% certain, Dr. Turner, that you can write 5 sentences that tell me what students in your area learn is different than astronomy.
Sure.
So I think that, I think there's a tendency to overcomplicate, and that's why I did something that was really dumbed down, is to sort of reinforce that it should be super, super basic. Otherwise, we're going to create another problem for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I was thinking, like, there's a lot of things computationally you might want them to do, but they're getting that from math courses, not necessarily assessed in my courses that don't have prereqs, and that's where a lot of those, like my classes aren't scaffolded where it's this one before this one, or you need this.
But by the end of that program of study, they will have learned that. So if that's
Right.
something that, as a geologist, they need to be able to compute, even though it's not a class you're teaching, right? In one of your classes, right, they will be doing that computation. You might not be teaching them how to do it, but they'll be expected to know that.
Well, because a lot of it is, I mean, it's very much a transfer program, so it's like getting them ready for classes we don't have here. Sort of thing. It's getting ready for their next thing.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily teach my class, but. they
Well,
can
then
get
that's
into
the
other
program
classes.
outcome, right? Then their student is, demonstrates, X so that they're prepared to enter Y. I mean, I guess if that's what
Yeah.
you're teaching, that makes your program unique.
Right, I think, again, coming back to those broader questions, right? As a student who is going through that course of study, at the end, what should they know and be able to do in 5 to 7 measurable outcomes? Okay. How are we doing?
Good.
Good?
And Dennis, after this, we'll talk about my laboratory space.
All right, so this is something that I wanted to introduce with this training because this is where we are headed, okay? So I just wanted to give you an introduction to kind of what this work that we're doing now, where we're heading with it. And so this is called a program outcome assessment map. And so this map will be able to answer some of the questions like, as a result of going through your program, you say that students should be able to do this. Where are they learning that, right? So this is what this map is designed to tell us, right, internally, right, for students, for external stakeholders, right, in your program, students should be able to do this as a result of going through this course of study. Where are they learning all of these skills? Where are you teaching them, right? Where are they learning this? So this map is an example for basket weaving, right? So a pretty clear example, and it's this is just the 4 courses, right? And so across the top here, you see basket weaving 1, basket weaving 2, anthropology course, and fiber science. So those are the 4 courses that are in this program. All of the program student learning outcomes are listed over here. So once we have those program outcomes in place, right, we are mapping where each program learning outcome, where students are acquiring that knowledge or have the opportunity to learn what you say they should be able to do. So this is where students are learning or have the opportunity to learn. Now, the other layer of information that this is giving us when fully completed, and again, we're not there yet, right? This is where we're headed, just to give you an idea, is when you map, right, you are indicating where that topic is introduced, where it is reinforced, and then where students should be able to develop a level of mastery, okay? So this is where you as an instructor, as a faculty member, are saying this is where I'm introducing this topic, potentially reinforcing this topic, or where I expect students to have mastered this student learning outcome. And so this just gives a visual, right? This is just a visual representation of answering those questions. You say students should be able to do these things. Where are they provided the opportunity to learn that information? And then the other piece that this could be helpful to identify, if you have a capstone course, at the end, where you're going to assess these is most likely going to be in that capstone course, because you're saying as a result of this program of study, students in this last outcome, this last capstone course should be able to demonstrate these student learning outcomes. If you do not have a capstone course, an assessment map helps you identify where these concepts are just being introduced and where you should expect, if you assess them, students should be able to demonstrate learning. So you would not want to assess for mastery or saying students have learned this necessarily in a class where you have just introduced the concept, right? But the program learning outcome is really saying, as a result of going through this program, when do I expect students to be able to demonstrate the level of learning that is indicated in my outcome, right? So this is just that visual representation of all of the courses in your program, all of your program learning outcomes, and then identifying where students have the opportunity to learn, and then where you are able, or when you are able to ask students to demonstrate their learning. Yes?
So there are only 4 courses here.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that answers my question, but most of these there's no mastery, and that's okay?
It's an example. Oh, I'm going to show you, yeah.
Well, and I mean, I wouldn't expect necessarily, right?
In a
Even if you finish if you finish a certificate, you finish an AA or AS degree, right? You still have additional learning to go on, right? I wouldn't expect necessarily when you graduate Triton that you be masterful in every subject area.
Right. But it's saying
Your
in
capstone is 2 years farther down the road, right?
Okay.
in your program learning outcomes, it should reflect the amount of learning that you expect students to have as a result of coming to training.
Well, if it's a 2-year terminal degree though, then you might expect to see more mastery.
Absolutely. If I'm
Okay.
teaching nursing, right? By the end,
Okay.
it's not, I'm just sort of getting reinforced on sticking a needle in someone. No, I need to be pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Good question.
Okay. So it's reflecting the level of learning that is occurring in your program. Okay. Yes, Gabe.
When we're talking about mastery, especially for AAS degrees, which for some reason they call it terminal.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing terminal. Are the levels of, I think these kind of assessments and other places where they incorporate some kind of scale of mastery, let's say, more like a rubric.
Yep.
Because not every student is going to end up, they will complete the course, and by whatever course assessments and evaluations there are, they will pass the courses, right? But at the end, some will show a better understanding of everything than others. So they have these kinds of scales. Are we going to get into that?
Yes.
Like
So when we
skill
start talking, you and Dennis are on the same page. When we start talking about assessing these, what we are going to be fleshing out is what does this mean for your program and contextualized within a community college setting, right? What the mastery would look like at a doctoral program is different than at a master's program, at a bachelor program, and at a community college, right? A 2-year degree. So when we talk about assessing these, the terminology that we use is going to be deeply rooted and contextualized within the community college setting. Does that make sense? But that's where we're heading. Yes, not for our work right now. But I wanted you to have this context as you're thinking about creating these outcomes.
I don't want to beat this horse because I know it's an advanced part here.
Yes.
But are these words the only words you would use for this chart? So introduce, mastery, and reinforce, or are there
So
other?
that is the typical. That is
So it would be
typical.
like introduce, advanced, and then mastery would be reinforced. Would be the proper
That's the
role.
typical language. But if you have feedback or suggestions for the
No,
assessment
I want to
committee
make
as
sure
we're
that
reviewing
I'm
this, yeah.
going to do it the way that it is.
Yeah, and this will be
I don't-
workshop 2.
Okay.
So we're just sort
Yes.
of painting the picture.
Yeah,
as
I
we
want
go
to keep
through
the end in mind.
Absolutely.
From the-
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this is actually really helpful.
Great. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Victor's first. Yeah.
Yeah, so at the very top, I'll use sociology as an example. So
Yeah.
at the very top, it should be, as it applies to my discipline, Social 100, Social 180, Social 225. So even though students are actually enrolled in other programs, if they have interest as far as concentration in sociology, I should not have at the very top as far as mapping, Rare 101 or something like that. It should
Correct.
only be sociology
Correct.
courses.
It's not going to be the general education core. It is going to be what makes your program unique, because the general education core is covered by our general education outcomes.
Okay.
Mhm. Did that, Francis? Yeah.
What you're saying is that we will never really assess the intro level courses. Because you're saying the mapping, you're going to assess the capstone, you're going to assess.
That's a natural place. I wouldn't say never. So where you're assessing should reflect the level of learning that you are expecting. If as a result of that course, they should be able to demonstrate this level of learning, then you could assess there, right? It's which courses are they given the opportunity to learn, and do you expect them to be able to show that they learned?
So in this pattern, there are some courses that you could never assess.
So I think here's where we are going to get on a slippery slope. We have to be very careful that we're distinguishing between program level outcomes and course level outcomes. All courses will continue to be assessed at the course level outcomes.
Yes.
Okay.
This is program level, and if the
Yes.
program level is learned, that objective or outcome is learned in an intro level class, then that's
Then you
where you
can.
assess it. But they're two side-by-side parallel assessments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is all within the context of program level. Thank you. Yes.
So I think I'm trying to envision this because that is easy to understand in the context of AAS programs, right? But in the context of AAS, I think we're gonna have the whatever program outcome, learning outcomes that we come up with, those are gonna be pretty much assessed at different times. I mean, different courses are gonna provide really the assessment
Yes.
of that particular
Yes.
learning outcome,
Yep.
not necessarily at the end,
Correct,
but
correct.
pretty much all over the
It's
place.
that's a general way of approaching it, but it's going to be very much so rooted in your particular program when students take those classes, right? That's a general tip, but absolutely that is up to, as you're filling this out, for you to determine.
One last thing just to kind of follow up on your question, because in the past, I'm talking about maybe 2-3 years, when we were mapping this in our department, yeah, the language was different, like some of the outcomes we were using talks or assessed. So this, just to make sure, it's really not that language that we're gonna use. We're gonna use something more similar to what we have.
So the taught and assessed is very faculty focused, right? And so we want to get towards outcome focused, where students are being introduced to this material, where it's reinforced, and then when students have mastery. So we want to move away from input focus and what faculty are doing and move towards student focused, what students should know and be able to do. Great point, thank you. Yes.
The gentleman who is, or individual that's coming, I'm certain
Joe.
is aware of for nursing, you know, we are different in how, in many ways, and how we are accredited and what ACM requires. So for example, our mapping is different than this when we talk about mastery and all of that. So I'm not even gonna bring it up here, but I'm assuming when we have this group that the individuals here will also be able to address, because to be honest, I don't want to do double work, because our accreditation is coming in January to March in 2020. So I'm just putting it out there that our mapping and our program outputs are 3, that's it. And then we have different ways of meeting those program outcomes. So I'm just putting it out there, and I certainly don't expect to address this here with our group, but we are different.
So in the workshops, we will be going over program level outcomes. I'm going to pull up the agenda for the workshop. But in terms of moving forward and working towards this mapping, you'll be working with us in the assessment committee. The external consultant, Joe, who's going to be here, is here to provide support and ask questions, right? And he is a coach, and I'm going to share all that information with you. But in terms of moving forward of what this institution will expect from you, you'll be working very closely with the assessment committee.
I just don't want to do double work.
That's great. So that's a conversation.
I don't want to do double
Right.
work, because ours is different from this.
Sure. Right. And
Yours is mandated by an outside.
Yes.
So, and we're not suggesting that you're going to be changing that.
No,
Yeah.
I can't.
No.
right. And so I think
We'll work with what you have.
Got it.
absolutely. But just to be clear, it's not you working with the external consultant. He's here to provide support, but
Right.
that's going to be working with the assessment
Right.
committee and me to do that. So I just want to be clear, you're not beholden to the external consultant, right? He's here to provide support, but that will be a conversation that we can have moving forward. Absolutely. Okay, do you have any further questions? Again, I don't want everyone to freak out about mapping, right? This is again going to be something that we do as a result of support moving forward. But as we're creating, I want you to have as much information as you need as you're creating, revising these outcomes to understand where we're headed, right? And so as you are creating those or revising those, you know the long-term plan, right? Again, this is not just a Band-Aid to get us through, right, this semester. This is not, right, this is a systematic change in how we're thinking about assessment, how we are building the structure to be lasting moving forward, right? So ideally, I mean, these can always be up for revisions, but these are going to be documents that carry us forward, not just slap, some outcomes down so I can move on, right? So that's the idea behind this work, and so I wanted to give you guys that vision of kind of where we're moving, so you can reflect that in your practice, okay? All right, so I wanted to address a potential challenge that might come up, and I wanted to distinguish between what might be kind of termed a coherent collection of courses versus a program, right? So just to address this coherent collection of courses, we have some programs that have a wide variety of electives that can be chosen from, right? So as a student moves through your program, you may encounter, as you're attempting to write program level learning outcomes, that students may be able to take anywhere between 5 and 15 electives as a result of going through your program. And that can potentially be challenging or present a challenge when it comes to writing program level learning outcomes. So that is what we would call, right, like a coherent collection of courses. You can take, right, a wide variety of courses in order to fulfill the requirements of this program. What we're looking for really is these program level outcomes. And so we want, 1, 2, 3 program outcomes that reflect the learning that might take place. So you could potentially run into the situation where you have quite a few electives that you'll actually need to roll up into a few program learning outcomes. And this can be a challenging process if there's a wide variety of electives that students could potentially take to fulfill that requirement for your course of study. We will support you through this process, right? But what we don't want is for a learning outcome to become so general to be able to reflect all of the choices that a student has where it renders meaningless, right? And so we want to be aware of that. If you are in that position, again, we are here to provide support, right, and provide direction, but those conversations should then be taking place within your department to say, there are so many options here. We don't necessarily have, a specific program learning outcome that could reflect the learning that would occur in all of these different electives. So that might potentially, we're kind of anticipating that potentially being a challenge when it comes to writing some of these program learning outcomes. And so we will support you through that process in terms of writing those program learning outcomes, kind of bubbling up from those different electives. But we do see that as a challenge and wanted to recognize that and just know that that, again, right, might be a point of discussion for your departments in different areas, something that could come up during this process. Okay? All right, so as we wrote, thank you so much for doing that, Christopher, helping me present, and for your fabulous example. I want to turn now, as we kind of come off that example of the work that's to be done, I want to talk about some of those key deliverables, right? Just getting very explicit in terms of what we will expect right out of this work. And so really quickly, just kind of go through that the curriculum committee changed the curriculum proposal form to include program objectives. Remember, those are more higher, a little bit higher level, what the program will do for students, and include program learning outcomes. So in the past, this has not been a requirement, right, on the curriculum form. And so when the last homework assignment, right, when we said, go find your program learning outcomes, right, there wasn't necessarily a central place where those were being kept. So now the curriculum proposal form has added this. So one of the deliverables, that's why I showed you the timeline at the beginning of the rest of this semester, is that all programs on this campus will have program learning outcomes, right? And they will meet the curriculum deadline to go through the curriculum process. They will be sent to your deans by November 5th, which is the start of the curriculum committee process. So the assessment committee will be reviewing, providing feedback before that, and then this form will be submitted to the deans after they've been approved through the assessment committee to go through the curriculum process. They will then become a part of the official documentation for the program as far as Triton College is concerned. Okay, so that is that end deliverable, that all of those would go meet that the deadline for the deans to submit to curriculum on November 5th. So that's why we backwards design those deadlines. And this will go through curriculum committee, and there will be a central place, right? When HLC comes in April 2020, they say, where are your learning outcomes? We have a central repository for all of our program level student learning outcomes. Yes?
What's the date to get the outcomes to the assessment committee?
So the majority of what we anticipate people submitting will be after that workshop on the 19th. So it's the 19th through 26th. We see a more majority of people submitting. The deadline for the assessment committee to provide feedback is Halloween on the 31st. And then the deadline to get those submitted, the workshop is the 2nd. The deadline to get those submitted to the dean is the 3rd. So then on the 5th, they will blanket submit, and they will go through the curriculum process. Okay? So that is one of the key deliverables for this stipend position for this semester. Okay? Now, these forms are drafts, so I just want to show you where we're working on them as the assessment committee. So these are draft forms. So this would be a document, right, that would reflect your program learning outcomes and then the method for gathering data. As we are thinking about that, it's very similar to what Christopher and I presented earlier in that example. It's just that idea of, are we thinking about how these can be assessed? These are not prescriptive, and that these are the only ways these things can be assessed, but it's making sure that we have in mind, right, when we're writing outcomes, how they could be assessed. So you could potentially list several, right? So if it's an essay, a presentation, maybe it's a demonstration, right, a practical exam, right, you can list a few ways that students can demonstrate that they have learned this outcome.
The problem I've always had with that is that, academic freedom. I can say this is what is going, a test, a presentation, whatever.
Absolutely.
But our 50 adjuncts do whatever they want. So what is the point of us saying how it's going to be assessed? And I know it sounds like I'm being argumentative, but I'm just saying, why does HLC want us to, or whoever, want us to say, this is how we will assess it, when that's not at all how it's going to be assessed.
It's how it could be assessed, and it's an exercise in ensuring that when we have these outcomes, we know that there are potential ways that they could be assessed, right? It's all, like, when you are creating this, if I've seen an outcome, I think, how could students show that, right? It goes down to the verb, it goes down to the level, it goes down to what they should be able to do. And when you say that, you should have in mind that there is a way. It is possible, right, to show that there is a method for gathering data. It is not, I want to emphasize, that is not prescriptive, right? If you put down essay, presentation, right, it's not saying that is the only way, but it's just making sure that there is a way that that outcome could be assessed, that students could demonstrate learning of that outcome, because that is not the case currently, right? That's what all of these things, right, are building towards. Yes. Please.
I don't think that requiring people to participate in conducting a particular assessment activity in a classroom violates their academic freedom. Academic freedom guarantees us the right to present core material to class in what we believe to be the most efficient method, and to evaluate our students' performance in ways that we believe correctly reflects their achievements and, correlates to what other institutions are doing. The assessment activity doesn't have to be part of that. I mean, it's really nifty if it is, because then nobody has to do anything extra, right? But if we simply tell people, you have to examine this program outcome for mastery in your classes however the heck you want, being able to report on that is going to be suspect, because we'll have such a wide range of data that there won't be a way that we can effectively summarize it. It just opens us up to criticism. So, as the chairperson in my department, I have no problem telling people that they're going to use a particular assessment instrument. I'm not interfering with them teaching their class. I'm asking them to complete an assignment.
For assessment, I agree with you, but the curriculum forms is, I guess, more of what I was talking about, that curriculum wants to know how are you going to assess it.
That is not part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
So this is just listing the program learning outcomes. This form is another internal document for this process. This is part of your stipend position.
Okay.
Is to complete this document. So for the curriculum form, it is just asking you for the program learning outcomes. This is a form that is going to be a part of the stipend work. Okay. Yeah.
Regarding this form, I know you were talking about drafting things up. So you've got program learning outcomes, you have the methods. Is it possible for you to continue that chart out? Because personally for me, when I do it, I have program and course learning outcomes, methods for gathering, who's gathering them, the results, the
You're
whole-
talking about an assessment plan?
So this is like a shortened version. Will there be a bigger plan for us to use and write out all of this?
Scaffolding, Pam. Absolutely. Yes. So this is where we are now. This is a deliverable for this semester, right? There will be, right? Yes, there is more work to be done, right? That's why this is we have 2 years of work to get done as a result of this process. This is what you are responsible as a deliverable for this semester as part of this stipend position, okay? So this form, the last one, this is absolutely a draft. We are currently working on this, right? So this is going to be the rubric, or a form of this rubric will be used to evaluate the learning outcomes that are coming to the assessment committee, okay? So this is something I'm going to be working on, working with the assessment committee to continue to improve this, but this was just an example. Again, this was our last training before the workshop. Some of you may be turning in your outcomes on the 19th, so I wanted to give you just some context and where we are at with that. The assessment committee will be using a standard rubric to assess these, and then the idea that we'll be working in teams, right, to provide feedback. It won't just be one individual's opinion of your outcomes, but it will be standardized, and there will be teams of individuals who are evaluating the outcomes. So this is how you will get feedback, right, on where your outcomes are at, right, areas where they could be improved. And then this work will all be done, again, before it enters the curriculum process, right? So I've had people inquire about feedback already. So this is going to be, I didn't want to do it on an individual basis. I didn't want you to get Lauren's perspective on your outcomes, right? I want it to be a standard rubric that as soon as it's completed, I will share out with all of you. So you'll know the expectations ahead of time. You will know exactly what needs to happen in order to get your outcomes through to the curriculum committee and to receive the stipend for the semester, right? So there should be no surprises. I am taking it on, responsibility on me that everyone is making it to the finish line in a successful way, right? So that is the goal of this project. It's the goal of this position, is that everyone crosses the finish line and we all have those outcomes exactly where we need them to be to move forward, right? So there should not, again, be any surprises. It's a feedback process for continuous improvement. It's not evaluation for evaluation's sake. And so this is just going to be the tool that we are using to standardize our feedback and ensure that everyone across the institution is on the same page and we're working from the same foundation, which again, we're all within the mind of vision casting of this is creating a sustainable and systematic structure for assessment to move forward. So we're really laying that foundation and laying that groundwork. So we want everyone to be at the same level and moving forward, built off the same foundation. Okay? Yes, Christopher?
I just want to make sure, since we're covering a lot of information, I just want to repeat and reinforce something Lauren said. This is not the rubric. Yeah. This is sort of a version of it. So don't be going and rewatching this PowerPoint presentation and saying, this is how it's going to be. Yeah. This will be revised, and when it is revised, it will be shared with you. But this is not the rubric.
Thank you, Christopher. I'll just repeat that again for those who are watching the recording. This is a draft. This is what we are building out for our purposes here at Triton, and I will share the final rubric with you and make it clear that that's the final rubric when we have built that out, when the assessment committee has approved that, and that we will move forward with the standard rubric so across the board everyone is being evaluated on the same criteria. Okay, thank you. All right. Then this is an example, right, when there's more courses, don't get overwhelmed, right, more than just the 4 courses. This is an example of what we're looking for in terms of our curriculum or our program assessment map. So we kind of did the table with the basket weaving. This is just an example of a form that we'll use when we start to engage in the actual mapping work. But again, this is what's coming. The key deliverable for this semester does not include this map, right?
This is spring?
Yes, yes. So for those of you, we wanted to have it prepared and get ready because there are some of you who are going to want to turn it in on the 19th and be like, I'm ready to go, right? What else can I do? And get some more work done. So we wanted this to be prepared But, and Joe will be speaking on mapping at the workshop. So again, I wanted to at least preview what we're talking about. I want you to go into the workshop on the 19th. Be like, what is he talking about in terms of mapping, right? Kind of give you a preview of where we're going. This is really setting us up for that workshop. But I wanted to give you a preview of where we're going so you are aware, and then also that this is going to be work that's coming, right? Kind of give you a preview of the next step, okay? But ultimately, you know, that's where we're going to end up. This is spring semester work, right? This current, you know, academic year, but spring semester work.
And we will leave off the gen eds, the gen ed classes. When we have the list of 20 courses, I'm like, 20 courses?
Yeah.
But 20 would, yeah, I know, but that would include gen eds, but you're saying we're not gonna be mapping the gen eds because the outcomes aren't supposed to address the gen eds.
They are going to be, this is all program level.
Yeah.
This was just built out for everyone,
Just
right?
clarifying.
Being inclusive across the institution, yes. No, we don't expect anyone to have 20 courses, okay? All right, so to give you a preview of that workshop that's coming, so we're ready to hit the ground running. When we walk in that day, we know what's being expected and we know what we're accomplishing. So Friday, October 19th, again, this is the workshop that if you're asking for subs, right, if you are doing that, like this is the one that we heavily, heavily encourage in-person attendance because of our external consultant that's coming in and the work that's being done, and then that timeline, right, that very quickly after that workshop, we're getting these outcomes through to the curriculum committee. So very heavily suggesting in-person attendance. Again, if you cannot, if it is impossible for you to attend that October 19th session, then some people have reached out to me directly. Please, that is a requirement for the stipend position to reach out to me directly and to make alternative accommodations. Okay, so I need an email with you documenting that you will not be there, and then also we will have to make alternative arrangements for that date. But if possible, at all possible, we really encourage attendance. So the external consultant who's coming in, his name is Joe Levy. He's the Executive Director of Assessment and Accreditation at National Lunas University. And then for our purposes, he is a National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment Coach. So he is part of the National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment. He does this work as a coach with several of our peer institutions. He's very familiar with community colleges. He has worked at a community college. And so he's very, very familiar with our work and has helped in a consulting manner with several of our peer institutions in this very similar work. So we're really, really excited to have him come. The brief agenda for the day, the morning session is going to be the workshop. We're going to have lunch provided, right? Get excited about food. And then the afternoon session is going to be one-on-one consultations that you can sign up to speak directly with Joe and answer questions, right? Get anything clarified. So really, again, have that support that you need to be successful in this. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't already, please sign up for those one-on-one consultations. You can do that by directly emailing me, and we are building out the calendar. When that is set, don't be afraid if you haven't heard back from me. We're building out that calendar, and when those appointments are set, we will be sending that out and confirming all of those one-on-one appointments. Okay. So a little bit more detail about the agenda. When you come in that morning, there will be kind of an assessment framework session, right, just to kind of contextualize all of this. The next session will be the program learning outcomes, diving really deep into that and how we connect that to the course level, the gen ed level, really laying that groundwork for us. And then the third session is that hands-on work. So you will be provided, right, in the workshop, you will be provided the program learning outcomes. You've sent them to us, right, if they're present, right, if you have them, you'll be provided with those program learning outcomes, right? We're also going to provide you with the catalog page, right, for your program degree certificate, and the course outlines, right, that make up your program. So that work of looking at your course outlines, right, and kind of bubbling up some program level outcomes from your courses, right, we'll provide you with that. Bring your own laptop if you would like. If not, we will be providing them here. So feel free to, if you like working on your personal laptop, to bring those. If not, you will be able to borrow one here, right? And then we will have lunch. can be a working lunch, right? If you are working with other people in your department or area, you can work through that lunch. And then also that second session will be open work time, right? So that is all going to be in a supported environment where you can get that work done. So please envision that day as we are carving out the space of time and giving you the support to get this work done, right? So please envision it like that and use all of that time to work on this in a supported environment. And then again, the afternoon will be those one-on-one appointments. So please email me if you haven't already to book a time either for that session, or we'll also have one-on-one consulting when Joe comes back to campus on November 2nd. And that will be right before the deadline to submit to curriculum. So you will have that time between the 19th and the 2nd to submit to the assessment committee, provide feedback. We will get our revisions back to you by Halloween. And then you will be able to, if you need to clean up any of those revisions, right, get everything together on the 2nd with support, and then you will be able to meet that deadline to turn it into curriculum. Okay? Yes?
So, I hate to be like the echo in the back of the room. So just to crystallize this 100%, because people still seem to be a little like not picking up the message. Our vision of this workshop is not like a fall faculty workshop. It is actually going to be, our vision is that you will leave out at the end of that day, if not having completed the program outcomes, at least to have had an incredibly good start so that you can have them completed in short order. So the vision is that in this workshop, we will start to finish, be done. That's our vision. Allowing a little bit more room for people who have 17 programs and like part was
Yes, thank you, Christopher, for emphasizing that. But yeah, the definition, right, being hands-on, having all the work completed, and then having that second workshop as an opportunity, right, providing space and resources for the work to get done, and then following up with the feedback and suggestions for revisions, so that by that time you're turning it in, right, there should be no questions, no comments, anything. They're sailing through, right? Okay, no surprises. All right, so thank you all very, very much. I'm going to open it up for questions as we move forward, but thank you all for being here. Thank you for your work. If you have any questions moving towards the workshop on the 19th, I hope to see every single one of you there.
Just one thing then, are there things we should be doing between now and the 19th?
So I would say that any work that you do, you should then view it in light of the information that you are going to gain on the 19th. So I'm not going to say don't touch them, right?
Yeah.
Because I know the deadlines are weighing on people. So I would say if you want to engage in some work, start drafting some stuff, come to the workshop with maybe a draft in mind, but be willing to shape those as a result of information that you gain at that workshop.